Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to you all. Thanks for sharing where you're joining us from in the chat. I see lots of people joining from the University of Minnesota and the rest of the state, as well as people from both the East and West Coast. And I even saw hello from Mexico. So we're glad you were able to join us today. Today's webinar will be on pathways to resilience during times of change. And my name is Molly Buss, and I'm the Community Relations Manager at the Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. And my role for today's webinar is to moderate the chat and share any responses from you, the participants, as well as facilitate any questions you have for Theresa at the end of her session. Before we get started, I just want to give a quick introduction about the Bakken Center. If it's your first time joining us for a webinar or you may not be familiar with our work, it is our vision to advance the health and well-being of individuals, organizations, and communities through integrative health and healing. And so in an effort to make our programming accessible, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, we're offering several free webinars and providing other online resources to help you take charge of your health and well-being. And I'll share more information about some of those resources via email after the webinar concludes. Today, I'm delighted to introduce Theresa Nutt, co-director of the Bakken Center's Integrative Health and Wellbeing Coaching Program. And before I turn things over to Theresa, there's just a few sort of logistical items I want to share with you to help you navigate the webinar functions. Throughout her session, Theresa will pose questions, and you'll have the opportunity to share your responses via the chat box. And if you are comfortable and want to share your responses with all participants, please update the to field in the chat box to all panelists and attendees. And that's a great way to create some community and connection during this time. There's also a Q&A icon where you can submit your questions, which Theresa will do her best to answer as many of those as possible at the end. If you aren't able to find either of those icons, try hovering your mouse over the bottom of the webinar screen and they should pop up for you there. We'll send out an email with slides and a recording of the webinar later today sometime. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to Theresa.
Thanks so much, Molly, and welcome everyone. As Molly said, my name is Theresa and I'm the co-director of the Integrative Health and Wellbeing Coaching Program. And I just want to start by saying I'm a nurse by first training, and so my heart goes out to all of the healthcare workers. And I know that's more than nurses and doctors. There are so many people who support healthcare in the world. So just putting a plug in for the people who are providing that much needed service during these times. And I'm really excited to offer this topic of resilience in times of change. I've actually been speaking about resilience for a good part of 15 to 20 years in different settings. And it's such an important topic, especially as we face what we're facing right now. So my screen is, there we go. So I want to start the way I start with most everything, and that's inviting all of us to just come to center and quiet our minds. So I would invite you to just get comfortable in your seat, letting your feet relax firmly on the floor in front of you, setting down anything you're holding on to, both in your mind and in your lap, so that you're just free and clear to just let your body relax. And I invite you to start noticing your breath without needing to change or fix anything about it. Just notice. And as you continue to breathe, see if you can pay attention to what your mind is doing. Maybe it's busy. Maybe it's frantic from everything you had to do to get here. So just inviting quietness. And some people find that if they just imagine their thoughts floating through like clouds on a passing day, it's an easy way to let the thoughts just come and go. And every time, bring your attention back to your breath. And I invite you, as you continue to breathe and let your mind go quiet, to pay attention to what your feet are doing. So often we are disconnected from our bodies and busy with our minds. So this is a chance to just bring all of that energy into our bodies, get really grounded and centered in ourselves, and thank our feet for all they do to support us throughout our day. And then I invite you to take 1 or 2 final breaths at your own pace, letting everything settle. I'm going to start with this visual. It is the strangest picture in some ways, and then again, not at all. So the reason I have this photo is that everyone will need different tools during times of stress. And so the point of this presentation today is to expose you to a number of different ideas of categories of interventions you can use or practices you can use to help you manage your resilience, and said another way, to help you bounce back from the stress we're all facing. And so the reason I have 2 different shoes is kind of what works for one person will not work for another. And so be open and curious. It's kind of like, I know we're all, staying in place right now, but if you think about buffets where you have multiple choices and you find your favorites, that's my invitation for you as we begin this time together. So I want to take a start with what's the stress response looks like in times of change. And many of us have heard of the research around fight or flight or freeze, which is that when we're under stress, we can get really agitated and find ourselves being angry and frustrated and short-tempered and having outbursts. Or we can be flight oriented. In other words, maybe I'm flight oriented. So when I'm under stress, I'm imagining getting on a plane to the warmest place as far away as possible. So that might mean you're a flight person. And then there's freeze, where you just suddenly kind of shut down, withdraw. Numb out is how some people might experience it, where you just kind of can't really do anything. So to just remember that during stress times, those might be some really significant ways you show up. And then I wanted to bring in a little neuroscience research just to say that one of the reasons stress really limits us in times of change is that we have this thing in our fabulous organ on top of our head called our brain that is called neuroefficiency. And what it means is that our brain always wants to take the fastest path, which means it's the most well-worn path. And so in times of stress, our ability to respond from a bigger place gets smaller and smaller because our brain says we need to reserve energy, we need to make decisions as quickly as we can, and we need to just keep moving. And so it really can make us go from a more expanded place to a very narrow, kind of automated or subconscious place. And so it's good to know that as we're dealing with stress and resilience. And then there are social implications. So right now, I think the social implications are larger than they've ever been, but in times of stress, it is hard to maintain our social relationships. We feel like withdrawing. We feel like it's hard to have the energy to do the usual things that bring me joy. And so we can disconnect ourselves from the very resources that can lift us up and help us through times of change. And so I just want to point that out, that obviously with the social distancing, and as many people have said, that's maybe a misnomer, it's more physical distancing, but we are not with people in the ways that we are used to being. And so everything's technology driven. If you want to connect, and that does make a difference. We have a much more limited connection. And so we have to be much more creative about how we are connecting with others. So we'll talk more about that as we go through. The other is your mindset. All of us have a mindset. We come with programming and we add to it over our lifetime. And I would say that our mindset can either be supportive in that sort of the glass is, half full and there are options and choices. And some of us are more easily aligned with that kind of open mindset. Others tend more toward the negative or the when something goes bad, then everything goes bad mindset. And there's nothing wrong with either one, but we have to be aware of how our mindset is impacting our ability to respond to things and how it might be playing out. Some people will notice in times of stress that they suddenly get their inner critic just gets so loud, and it's like one little thing goes wrong and then they're telling themselves they're a failure, and then this whole spiral starts to happen. And so it's really important to just know what your mindset is and use it to pay attention. All of these things are indicators when our stress level is higher than it should be. So if for you, it is the inner critic, or for others, it might be more of a just kind of a suddenly I'm sad and weepy and I feel like I just can't accomplish anything. Okay, your mindset is not supporting you, and it's good to notice that. Another big piece of this that's really important to point out is we all have unconscious coping. When I did some work with trauma, some training in the past, one of my favorite metaphors that was used is we kind of all have this inner grandmother, and she wants to soothe us. And so sometimes that looks like eating more than we normally would, or eating different things that are not supporting us, or watching a lot of television. Anything to do to sort of soothe and numb can be some of those unconscious coping. So again, being aware of what those are and how they show up. And I think the last part, I just want to point to our Western culture with a lot of love, because I'm a part of it. But we have this whole mindset, right, of like, just keep moving and just accomplish things, and it's business as usual. And honestly, right now, there's nothing about what we're experiencing on many levels that is business as usual. There's a high amount of uncertainty, and there's a lot of responsibility that people 4 or 5 weeks ago were not dealing with here in the States that they are now. So I just want to point out that our whole like get it done, just keep moving, we need to accomplish things. Yes, and there's got to be room for more. So that sort of lays the groundwork of the many factors that are playing into this time in our lives. And I want to just dive a little deeper and take a look in kind of slow motion at some of the signals. And I'm hearing this from my own coaching clients and also from our students who are coaching clients, is that there are some signals from their body that are showing up, and they are aches and pains, new muscle tension, headaches, eye twitches, fatigue, changes in libido, to just name a few. So our bodies have a great way of informing us when things are not quite right. And it's usually short-term stress. So these are all the short-term signs that, hey, something's new in my life and I haven't quite figured out how to manage it yet. So it's stressing me, because sometimes we're not aware. And so we're not going to pick up the signal other ways, but we can notice when these sort of things show up in more intensity than they had previously, or are brand new, that maybe we should pay attention to our stress level and how we're managing our resilience. And for other people, they might not get signals from their body, but there might be changes in behavior. And again, this is stress that lasts. So here we are, we're about 5 weeks in. So it's been long enough where stress might start to look like people are angry and agitated, or just feel like there's this restlessness and frustration that they can't quite explain. They have new or intensified emotional outbursts. They start withdrawing from social activities and relationships. And there's over and under eating. So again, some signals that we can tune into and pay attention to as we're trying to manage during these times that might be telling us we need to do some things to up our resilience game. And I think the whole point of even bringing up this little side trip of the research around stress is to really look at the long-term effects. There's a reason why we need to learn strategies for resilience, because uninterrupted stress causes some serious health concerns. And one of those is decreased immunity. So some people, over enough time, if they've been stressed long enough, will start to notice that they get sick more easily or more often. Others will gain weight. So obesity is a side effect of uninterrupted stress, stress that's not being interrupted or mitigated or just changed for you in any way. And then there's the medical conditions like heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, depression, and anxiety. So there are a number of reasons why we want to interrupt and help you build resilience, because the truth is that stress, honestly, as a health coach, I've seen over the 18 years I've done it, is the biggest indicator of a number of things about people's well-being. And so having tools to build resilience is just mission critical, especially during this time, but all your life. So it's just an important skill set to have. So enough of the background. I want to hear from you. How do you know your stress level is higher than normal? So this is your chance to hop on the chat and give us some feedback. And I just listed some of the possible ways you might know. So are there body sensations, behavior changes? Does your motivation change? Or does your health change? And if there's something else, let us know that as well. I'm just going to give us a minute to see what happens in the chat.
Yeah, we're already getting a lot of responses, Theresa, and certainly those body sensations are coming up. So headaches or feelings of tightness in the chest, maybe. In terms of behavior changes, I see some responses about eating differently or not getting enough sleep. Definitely the lack of motivation is also resonating with people. So feel free to continue to share any responses you have in the chat. Obviously, we won't be able to get to them all, but we'll continue to check in throughout the session.
Thanks so much, Molly. So I want to start with the definition of resilience, because it seems important that we're all sort of talking about the same thing. And I'm going to use the American Psychological Association because I think it really captures what's happening right now. And that is that resilience is a process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. And I think COVID-19 sort of has a little bit of all of those things in it. So it seems like a very fitting definition. And sort of the new age is the wrong word, but sort of the more general definition that's being used a lot out there, it's like how you bounce back, move forward, or create a new normal when the unexpected happens. And that's what we all need to do right now more than ever and ongoing, because part of the struggle or the strain of this adversity we are currently facing is sort of the unknown. How long will this last? What are the possible side effects? What will work look like? What will so many things look like? And so trying to find a new normal is a little challenging, because it's not like an event happens and then we can quickly move on. It's like it continues to happen. And so we have ongoing adversity, which is a challenge that heightens some of what we need to pay attention to. And I love this quote. It seems very appropriate. It's not the load that breaks you down, it's the way you carry it. So my invitation for this next part is, let's pay attention to how you are carrying your load of stress and see if we can offer some resilience strategies that will help you carry it with more grace and ease. So in my mind, there are 6 strategies, and strategies is a strong word, but more buckets of ways that you can build resilience. And the first is to reset your mind. So mindset can be so helpful when dealing with stress. And so we'll talk about significant strategies for doing that. Another is to be present and be really in the moment. A third is to nourish your body and your mind. And specifically, we'll talk about breathing techniques that help with that. And one that I think is coming up a lot right now is learning how to allow for emotions and how to tend to them without pushing them down or pushing them away. Taking care of the basics. How do we take care of ourselves in times when it's really stressful and not forget some of the basic daily care we need to be well? And then finally, this one might be hard for some people, but to really make room for play and joy is one of the key ways to help build resilience. So those are our buckets of categories, and we're going to go through them in more depth one by one. but I have another question for you for the chat. So right now, based on what you know, what is your favorite way to manage your stress and build your resilience? So if you can just offer some thoughts in the chat, we would be so grateful.
So I'm getting a lot of responses about moving your body, whether that's biking or going for walks or doing a yoga class in your home. Also seeing some different hobbies like painting or journaling or getting out in nature, spending time with families. So a lot of those kind of physical activities, as well as things that we can do to continue to kind of keep busy, I guess.
Great. Thanks so much, Molly. Appreciate it. So let's start with shifting your mindset. And I think part of what happens when we're under stress, remember our kind of ability to respond gets very narrow, is that we start focusing on everything that's wrong. Instead of, what I recommend is you learn how to focus on what's right in your world and build self-compassion when you're under a lot of stress. That's a fast way to get to resilience. And one of the quickest ways is gratitude. And there are so many different practices. So I think most all of us have heard of gratitude practices, but to really have a habit, I have found for myself that during this time, having a habit of gratitude has been huge. So really spending time, for me, it's before bed, reflecting on my day and just saying, are there 3 to 4 things I can note that I'm super grateful for? And to really tune into those. So there are a number of ways to practice gratitude. And I do, just as I'm going along, want to plug for the Taking Charge of Your Health and Wellbeing site, because there are great things there about gratitude and some other practices. So once we're done with this presentation, don't be afraid to go. It's going to come through on the follow-up materials, but there's going to be more in depth of some things you can do to really beef up your practices. So I want to make sure you know that website will help you with every part of this. Another body of work out there was started by Kristen Neff, and it has expanded greatly since her PhD dissertation on self-compassion, is around this: how do we, when we're in times of stress, instead of turning on ourselves, which is the very common way to respond, learn how to be more gentle and more open and more curious with ourselves, and let ourselves know that we understand that it's stressful, that we're hurting, that it's a struggle. And one of my favorite of the self-compassion practices that I use myself in my own life and teach my clients is really about really stopping and saying what we need to hear at times, like when we're stressed or under pressure. And it's kind of like that whole, this is challenging for me. Other people struggle too. I'm going to be kind to myself while I'm struggling. It's just sort of a way of gently talking to yourself. And that's one script. There are many you could have, but I recommend that if self-compassion is something you struggle with when you're dealing with challenges, that you have a script, whether it's written on an index card or you've got it somewhere in your mind, that you can pull up and practice. So many of these things, they're called practices for a reason. And in my work as a holistic nurse clinician in hospitals, one of the saddest things, and I'm pointing it out here because it's really important, is that when people are in times of crisis, it's really hard to learn a new skill for self-care and self-resilience. And so you need to practice when the stakes aren't as high. Now, here we all are. We're in this place where we can't actually, change how high the stakes are, but we can be practicing for the really hard times all the time, so that when we are in that position, we can easily pull on our practices and have them support us. So building self-compassion, learning how to be that kind, caring person. And another very quick self-compassion practice would be to imagine what you would say to your best friend if they came to you with the same situation you're in. And usually the way you would respond is very compassionately. So turning that to yourself. So there are a number, but that's a couple of quick ones. The research out there shows that the biggest way to shift mindset is the ability to adapt, transform thinking, and respond instead of react. And so I wanted to pull out that little formula. It seems like a lot, and on the other hand, it's what gets us from that really narrow place. It's like, okay, I'm in a stress place. Can I notice that I'm there? Can I then adapt my way of showing up for myself transform how I'm thinking, and then respond instead of react. And so I feel like it's a really great way to just slow it down. What we need when we're under stress is a way to slow it all down. Because once we get anxious and get a very narrow focus, it's really hard to be thoughtful and conscious. And there's nothing wrong, there's just zero wrong with having that immediate, very narrow response. So I want to say that out loud. Of course, under immediate stress, we're going to get very narrow. It happens to all of us. But if we can slow ourselves down, then when we notice ourselves there, then we can be more responsive. And paying attention to what's in and out of control is so huge, right? There's so many things right now. I think that's where people struggle the most in my experience right now, is this sense of so much is out of my control, and people are wanting to control things that can't be controlled. So really paying attention to, in whatever way you can, what's in your control and what's out of your control. And for some of us, that control thing is a really big trigger in times of stress. So it's really important to pay attention to. Another is taking a look at perspective. So all of us can have the sort of really narrow, again, the very small, I'm in the stress moment, all I can think about is protecting myself. Our ego gets really triggered, we get really small and we want to fight or flee or whatever. That's one perspective. And then we can move out a little further and say, okay, if I were 10 feet away from this situation, how might I think about it? If I were flying overhead this situation, how might I think about it? There are different ways we can move how we are in relationship with things that can offer us new information and new ways of responding. So perspective taking is powerful. And then finally, affirmations. Now I want to say a few things about affirmations. One, strangely, you don't have to actually believe it when you say it, which is super helpful. And two, it's helpful to know that you have to use the present moment. So a lot of people are like affirmations like, I want to XYZ. Well, I want to tells your mind someday this might happen, but really we're not sure. So when you use an affirmation, it's like, I'm just thinking about one that would be super helpful in a time like this. I am calm and centered, right? To just say that over and over to ourselves and to really tune in. It's present moment. I am something. And it's really focused on, yep, maybe you aren't calm and centered, but as you tell your mind over and over, it will learn that new way of being. And so affirmations can be helpful. The third thing I want to say about them, don't hit yourself over the head with them either. So if saying the affirmations is making you more anxious or more charged in the moment because you're so worked up, let it go and come back to it when you're less emotionally charged around the situation. So affirmations are a great tool, and we have to be mindful of how we use them. And I want to talk about getting into the present moment, which is another great bucket, because frankly, the reason we ruminate, we're either in the future or in the past. Can't ruminate in the present moment, right here, right now. And it's where we reconnect with ourselves. One of my teachers happens to be trained in mindfulness, and one of the things she said is, if you look at the ancient texts around mindfulness, the original meaning translated means coming back to self. And so that's what we're talking about here. It's being really in the present moment. And some great ways, and one of the things that can't be taken away right now is nature, which is so great, because getting in nature and really being in nature, not just absent-mindedly being in nature, but saying, oh, there's a tree, oh, there's a snowflake, oh, really noticing what's happening in nature or looking out the window and noticing it has a huge effect. Other things like what we did at the very start, where we did a grounding and centering practice to just get back in touch with us. Huge, great way to get back into the present moment. Another is heart math, and I'm just going to give you a one of the quickest techniques, but heart math is an entire body of research and practice around helping people get in what they call coherence, which is where your heart and your brain are in sync. And so that is a great way to calm the mind and get your entire being sort of in alignment. And so the quick coherence technique, the point of it is to quiet your mind. So we'll do a quick one for about 30 seconds. It's like quiet your mind, close your eyes, take a couple of breaths, and actually imagine breathing right in and out through your heart. And really bring your attention to your heart. And while you're breathing in and out through your heart, start to pay attention to an experience that made you feel appreciation, joy, love, some kind of positive emotion, and get really in touch with it. Who were the people in it? What was happening? How were you feeling? What were you seeing around you, smelling, hearing? Just really tune into all the details until you can really feel it for yourself. And keep breathing in and out through your heart. And then when you're ready, you can bring your attention back to where you are. So that's a quick way for me. I just want to quickly share, I always can see my nephew, who is now 10, when he was 2 years old, and I was running with him up and down the road, and we were chasing fireflies after dark. And he would say, "Get it," over and over again. And up and down the road we would go chasing these fireflies. It brings me so much joy, and I can tune into that, and it immediately shifts me and makes me feel more centered and grounded. So whatever that experience is for you, having that available so that you can lean on it when you need to is really powerful. The last thing I want to point out is capitalizing on transitions, which is this idea that we all have a lot of things we do in every single day, from getting up in the morning to brushing our teeth to breakfast to our commute if you still are working, etc. And we often do them quite mindlessly. And so using those moments to get in the present, to have some kind of practice to really make it something that supports your well-being is highly recommended. So even if there are 1 or 2 times a day, you can use one of your transitions to help support your well-being. It's well worth your time. And then I want to go a little deeper with breath and mindfulness, and more looking at how we can nourish ourselves and our mind, because a lot of what we take in can actually do the opposite, right? So there are breathing practices that can energize and calm. And, there's some that I was trained in something called the miracle of the breath. And there were things called the Tarzan breath, where you pound on your chest and you're making the Tarzan sound, and you're just breathing really loud and making noise, and it can really energize your body. There are others, obviously, where we want to calm, and those can be things like, breathing in the word calm and breathing out tension on the out breath. So using breath to nourish ourselves, and which also nourishes our mind, can be a really, really important way to do that. And then creating moments for mindfulness throughout our day. Again, we do so many things unconsciously all the time, and just making little moments where we can plug back into ourselves. Imagine, one of the ones that I've heard lately is imagining that your heart is smiling at every cell in your body, and then imagining that every cell in your body is smiling back. What a quick way to just kind of nourish every part of ourselves. And then engaging in things that bring you comfort, peace, and relaxation. And what that is for you is different for every single person. So I couldn't say what that is, but really making the time for them. When we're under stress, we tend to sort of shut down and not always pay attention to those things that really work for us. And it is hard. The last one I added, it's not part of my usual repertoire, but it feels important right now as we're dealing with being plugged into electronics all the time now. Work and home and school for kids and etc. is forcing us to be really plugged in. So even if it's a half an hour a day, to be able to unplug from electronics and having so much information and stimulation coming at you lets your nervous system know it can relax and downshift, and that nourishes your cells and quiets your mind. So just some ideas that I want to bring forward there. Let's talk about emotions. So one of the things that I see people doing, and it might be the Midwest thing, I grew up in a German Catholic family, so being Stoic was really valued in my family, and I've come a long way since then. But to really understand that emotions are really important, and they need to be welcomed, they need to be recognized, and we need to learn how to soften to them, because when we stuff them, there's actual research that storing emotions in our body creates disease. Literally, whether that's mental health disorders or actual physical conditions. So being able to soften to emotions is so important, and everyone will do this differently. So how can you allow your emotions? How can you learn what they feel like to you? How can you make space for them? Some people do things like Every hour some coaching clients I've had over the years, every hour they would just write what they were feeling at the time, just to start to pay attention to, oh, what is it I feel in a day? Find ways to process. This is the part I think we often miss. Some of us know what we're feeling, but we don't have ways to move it through our body. So emotions are just meant to move. They are signals. They let us know what's going on, and they need a way to move through us. And so having a way to process that makes sense to us is really important, whether that's talking to a trusted friend, seeing a mental health professional, whatever it is. There are a number of ways. None of them are wrong. Journaling, which some of you mentioned a little while ago, is one of your favorite ways to manage your stress. So many possible ways, but having a way to not only know your emotions, but to process them is important. And then I will just put a plug for mental health. Please get support if you need it. Right now, things are heightened, and I'm hearing from people that on top of life changes that are happening or whatever's happening in their personal lives, just the overall anxiety and uncertainty of this time is making people feel things in a very heightened way, and it can feel overwhelming. And I just want to say that please get help. There are some great mental health professionals out there who can help you talk it through, figure out what you need, etc. And so don't go it alone. That's one of the big mistakes people make. They try to tough it out and go it alone. And that leads to the final, reach out and stay connected with others. Again, we have social distancing right now, but there are many ways to connect. And as a matter of fact, I'm hearing people do things like having virtual happy hours. And I've heard of virtual dinner parties from a couple of my clients where each family is eating their meal, but they're doing it together and talking about life while they're doing it. So stay connected with the people you love or that can really lift you up when you need them. And then the basics. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it's just the reminder that self-care needs to be a priority, not an afterthought. And when we're really busy and really stressed, it tends to get put on the back burner. So again, so many of you mentioned movement. That's so great. Whatever ways you want to move to keep your body and mind healthy and well, that's so important. Eating nutrient-rich food, having affection and connection in your life. Back to that, we're very communal beings. So having ways to stay connected is important. And I actually noted that earlier today there was some conversation by professionals that for now you can hug a tree if that might help. So I'm throwing it out. I'm not sure if that replaces human connection, but nonetheless, it's an option. Pets can be a great source of affection and connection during this time as well. Sleep hygiene. Again, there's so much great information on the Taking Charge website. But really having a good routine for sleep can make a big, big difference in times of high stress. And having some routines and rhythms, all of us have been disrupted during this time as far as what our normal routines are, what some rhythms are. So having some of that built in can really just help your body and mind know what to expect. So it can be really valuable. Being vulnerable and being willing to receive from others is just critical. It can be the hardest thing for us. We tend to want to do it ourselves and be fiercely independent, and that can be a disconnect. Paying attention to our environment. So it's springtime. In theory, granted, we have snow here in Minnesota, but this can be a great time to spring clean and just make a little space for yourself and your environment. Have it be really comforting and relaxing versus really cluttered and overwhelming. Having time throughout your day to just check in with yourself is important, and taking breaks, those kind of go hand in hand. And then the last thing is paying attention to what brings you meaning and purpose, which can be easily overlooked during times like these. And then one of my favorites is to make time for play and joy. And it is just a way to fuel your spirit. And so finding ways to laugh with colleagues or others during this time. Look for moments that light you up and really pay attention to them. Look for inspiration. I'm a quote person, so collecting quotes that really speak to me or noting beauty wherever I can. Celebrate the little wins. Every little thing should be celebrated right now. We are all operating in the strangest times, so really stopping and celebrating is really critical. And making time to do the things you love. So that can be really, really rejuvenating. And having creative outlets and self-expression. So some of those go hand in hand and sometimes they're different. So all of them fun ways to just make time for that playful side of you, which will fuel your spirit and help you navigate the challenging times. So one more time in the chat box, I would love to hear from each of you what new resilience practice you're willing to commit to today.
So feel free to share your response in the chat box, and we are getting some responses in already. Moving more, maybe that's taking a walk or doing yoga, get outside, find a better routine, implementing some gratitude practices. So kind of across the board on the different strategies that you shared, Theresa, it sounds like at least, one thing resonated with everyone. So depending on what you need, that strategy will be great for you.
Thanks, Molly. Great. All right, so, and I'm not going to go over these because you're going to get the slides afterwards, but I put both a slide of resources that are books that can be really helpful, and also some research and other sort of resources, including the Center's COVID-19 resource page, which has a number of things there. So just places you can stop and take a look and get more resources and more information if you're curious. And to just close with this thought that you can't always control what goes on outside, but you can always control what happens on the inside. So that's what I leave you with today. And we're going to just real quickly take a look at the strategies one more time, just so you have them top of mind. You can shift your mindset, be in the present moment. I'm not clicking fast enough, obviously. Nourish your cells in your mind. Recognize and welcome and soften to your emotions. Take care of the basics and make time for play and joy. So I want to open it up, Molly, and see if there are questions we can attend to in the few minutes we have left.
Yeah, definitely. And if anyone has any other questions, feel free to submit them via the Q&A function. We do have a couple of minutes here. So one question that came in was about kind of implementing strategies or maintaining healthy mental health when it's hard to see a light at the end of the tunnel or no foreseeable end to the pandemic. Do you have any thoughts or strategies for that?
Yeah, I think it's what we're all facing. So I appreciate the question, Molly. Thank you. And to whoever asked it. And I think the biggest thing is to go back to that what's in and out of my control, because a lot of people are experiencing high levels of anxiety because they're trying to control things that they can't. And so really, what can you control? And maybe starting there, and also doing things that just nourish and relax your nervous system. I think those two things in combination help sort of minimize that, yes, we're in this for we don't know how long. And at the same time, we can be doing some things to help us weather the storm, so to speak.
Great. Another question we received is from someone who has a friend that has been very negative and just been feeding into the news, etc. And do you have any suggestions on how to deal with a friend or a loved one that maybe is taking that route during this time?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, what a great question. Isn't that the truth? Everyone responds differently. So I think to think back and remember the fight, flight, or freeze. So some people can get really negative because they're in that fight mode. So that just remember their thinking's really narrow. They're really struggling, and the way it's coming out is kind of unpleasant. So if you can have grace for them and yourself in that moment, and also just trying to do little things to sort of lift their mood, which they may or may not be able to take in, but to just sort of, instead of engaging with that, it's like a keto for the soul, just kind of offer a little distraction over here.
Great. And to stay on time, we only have time for one more question. And someone was wondering if you could share any tips for maintaining a good sleep schedule or getting better sleep. And I also wanted to note that we will be hosting a webinar specifically on sleep in May. So watch for more details on that soon.
Great. Thanks, Molly. Yeah, it's such a good question. So I think a few things, and there are millions. So again, go back to the Taking Charge website because there's some information on sleep hygiene. But in the meantime, really having a routine for getting ready for bed. I think one of the things I'm hearing about right now is people are sort of on their technology until right before they go to bed, and it can be very hard for our minds to slow down. So you want to have a routine that for 30 to 40 minutes, maybe even an hour before you go to bed, allows your mind to unwind. So whether it's reading a book or talking to a loved one or whatever it is, having that time to downshift, not having electronics in your bed, um, not exercising too late in the evening, because that can also sort of wire your mind. So you want to do something in that hour before bed that just tells your body and mind it's time to relax. And one of the other quick ways to really help is, again, back to that routine thing. Try to go to bed at the same time every day and wake at the same time. Those kind of things can really make a big difference.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Theresa. And unfortunately, we got a lot of questions that we don't have time for, but hopefully the email that we send out after the webinar concludes will be helpful to you all. It will have some of those links that Theresa shared, as well as some other specific COVID-19 resources, and a great tip sheet on some of the strategies that Theresa shared as well today. So watch for that email, and please also fill out the survey to share with us your thoughts about today's webinar, and we hope that you'll join us for one of our future opportunities.